So thank you everybody for joining us for our Seek Safely monthly roundtable. My name is Jean Brown and I'm joined today by two coaches. We're going to be diving into the topic of coaching, which is something that kind of comes up as being within self-help or sort of adjacent to self-help. So I'm really excited to have our guests today. I'll be talking with Eilish McKeown, who is a master certified coach. She has 30 years of professional experience across the public, private, and voluntary sectors. She has worked with multinationals in finance and was a lead in developing the coaching and mentoring service in the Irish Health Service. She was president of the International Coaching Federation chapter in Ireland in 2017. During that time, she brought the late Judith E. Glazer to Ireland to speak about conversational intelligence. She is a performance-enhancing career coach with a particular emphasis on continuous improvement, strengthening leadership capability, and role transition and conflict coaching. She also mentors coaches who are working towards their own coaching certifications. Her philosophy holds that each of us has within us the resources and potential for self-understanding and change. I love that, Eilish. That's really lovely.
And I do really believe that passionately. You know?
Yeah, that's excellent. So then we also have with us Kathleen Brady. Kathleen is a certified career and life management coach, author, and educator with more than 25 years of experience in helping people identify and integrate their professional and personal goals, grounded in the firm belief that everything is possible if you are willing to put in the effort. Kathleen inspires clients to explore their dreams for clues about what would fill their hearts with joy and empowers them to define success for themselves. She guides her clients through a self-discovery journey amid the obstacles and realities of life, offering practical action steps to make the impossible possible. She is currently the principal at KB Career Planners and the managing director and head of coaching at Preferred Transition Resources. So again, Kathleen, thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be invited.
Excellent. So yeah, as I was saying off the top, coaching is kind of one of those things that tends to come up a lot when we're talking about self-help. We often think of coaching, I think of it as something that's sitting somewhere between traditional therapy modalities and what we would consider more self-directed, consumer-directed self-help. So I'd like to start out, since both of you are professionals in the coaching industry, let's talk about what is coaching. Maybe Kathleen, you can give us like a bit of a definition.
I see it as a professional alliance with your client to help people just identify and align their personal and professional goals. And it's really about a process of reflection so that you can make intentional choices.
Right.
It's different from some of these other modalities where it is about thinking about where have you come from, resolving issues from the past. It's really, you certainly want to be looking at your past to look for patterns, but coaching is more about, okay, you're here right now. What are your goals? What do you want to do? And what's next? How do you get there? Designing those action plans.
All right.
I think Eilish probably has a much more definitive definition, right?
No, I think I would agree with everything you said. And I suppose I'm worked throughout my career with the International Coach Federation, and our definition, if you like, is partnering with the client, which is exactly what you said. And really the whole focus is that the individual has within them the power, the knowledge, the know-how to get to where they want to go themselves. And that's the big difference in coaching and self-help and other modalities. That the person, working with the person, they find that resource and it makes them a much better person. And also it's future oriented, like Kathleen said. It's very much in ICF, if you completely dwelt on the past and you sent in a recording, it would be failed. It must be a large part future oriented.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that distinction between That's something that we try to tell self-help consumers a lot, that sometimes we have noticed some self-help figures will sort of present themselves as having all the answers, whereas I can hear from both of you that you're saying the coach is trying to help the consumer realize they have the answers and they're just help pulling it forward.
Yeah.
So I like that a lot.
It really is a process. And I always think you got to be careful when people say, well, what should I do? Well, I don't know. I've known you for 15 minutes. You want me to tell you what to do?
Right.
I can't tell you that, but I can ask you some questions to help you get there.
Right.
And that's the difference. And I think there are a lot of people out there who do call themselves coaches without the certifications and all of that, who are saying, just do these 3 things and your life will be perfect. And you got to be careful about that.
Right. Yeah. We'll get into that question of certification in a minute. Just to go over, the sort of basics of coaching. What types of coaches are there? Are there different types? Eilish, maybe you can get into that.
It's interesting because it's expanding as time goes on. I began as a conflict coach in 2008, and that was associated with the role I had working with managers and unions nationally, and I had to be capable of conflict management. But there are, I suppose, the most common ones is life and career and business and executive. And now in the last number of years, there's medical coaching, health coaching, and the ICF would have, groups that meet on those specific headings. And there's maybe Kathleen can think of others, but those are the key ones that I notice,
Mm-hmm.
Leadership, health, wellness, certainly, but all the ones that you've just mentioned. I also noticed that, one of the things they often talk about is finding your niche. So now people get dating coaches, relationship coaches, nutrition coaches. I mean, I do worry a little bit about people who have a coach, I have a nutrition coach, I have this coach, I have that. Like, you don't need quite that many. So kind of think what's your key area, because a good coach, I'm not a nutrition coach, I don't have the knowledge, but I can certainly, if that's an area that you're interested in, we can sort of come up with what's a game plan to make sure that you're getting the nutrition you need or whatever. But because I'm focusing on the process, some people get so caught up and they want advice from all of these different areas, and the answer lies within. So beat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk a little bit more about that certification with coaching, because like you said, we get concerned sometimes that sort of anyone can call themselves a coach, but I do see within the coaching industry, there does seem to be a real push to professionalize the industry, which I think is fantastic. I know you're both ICF certified, so I was looking at ICF, looking on the website and reading about some of the practices, like how the ICF certified coaches renew their credentials every 3 years. There's a really robust code of ethics, I think, and a review process as well, which is really important in case anyone's practices are sort of coming into question against that code of ethics. One of the points I noticed was asking coaches to accurately identify their credentials, which these are all some of the things that Seek Safely is sort of pushing for within the self-help industry. So I'd like to hear a little bit about, maybe Eilish, you can address what different types of certifications there are for coaches.
Yeah, and there's more than ICF, and I need to say that. I suppose that there's a European Mentoring and Coaching Council, and it's known as EMCC for short, just like ICF. And it began in the UK and it spread through Europe, and I think they have about 8,000 members. The ICF is a very global organization. It covers 150 countries, has 46,000 members in it, and they have about 30,000 credentialed coaches and over 1,000 at MCC level. But just to say, I thought, when you asked the question, is it okay if I go back to, when I started to be a coach, okay, I was a conflict coach, but when I began training to be a coach, and if anyone's listening, I thought, what does the listener want to hear? And lots of people want to move career from business to coaching, and a lot of people in our Judith Glazer class were people who were making that move very successfully. But to start off, you do need 60 hours of training for the ICF, and I'd say it's similar for EMCC, I don't know. And there's the Association for Coaching. And then you have to have 100 hours of coaching to become an ACC coach, and you must present a recording. So there is a responsibility on the trainee to produce a recording, and that's assessed by an external assessor for ICF and internal to ICF. And that's the first step on the ladder, if you like. You become an associate. And like they say in ICF, that's the what of the person. So if I'm coaching you, it's the what of who you are. And I'm not expected at that level to go as deep as maybe as you move towards mastery. But what I did notice, even when I was at ACC approaching that there is elements of the who and there's elements of the master in us all. And so I wouldn't exclude anyone when you're training to be a coach. And some people are masters straight away, and some people aren't even capable of becoming a coach because they're too controlling. So I think there's different levels, and maybe Kathleen wants to say more about that. I could talk all day on the certification.
No, it's funny, when I started, I went just to have the credential, and I was a little snarky, thinking, I've already been doing this work. What could they possibly really teach me? I just want the letters after my name so that I could say to people, yes, I have this credential. And when I went through the training, I realized, I was further along than many people because I had been doing some sort of form of counseling and advising. But this opened up, I hate to be melodramatic, but I always say it really did change my life, because not only now do I have the tools to help my clients, but it just gave me a whole different way to view life. And so it really is a self-discovery process, but you really can't help other people in self-discovery unless you really open up to do it yourself. And it's through that process. But I think the credentialing is important because a lot of people are just calling themselves a coach. And I had this conversation with a friend of mine. He calls himself a coach. And I'm like, I said, did you get certified? He's like, I don't need to be certified. And I said, you kind of do. If you want to call yourself like you're a communication advisor, but you're not a coach. It's very different because you are being instructive. I'm not instructive. I have sometimes hybrid pieces of information that I can share with people, a knowledge base around careers and career transition and all of that. But at the end of the day, I don't say this is what you need to do.
Right.
And I think that's the difference. And understand that.
I love your experience there, Kathleen, of, having done some of the work before then actually getting the certification and finding like a little humility there from what you thought you knew.
Right.
Because that's something, again, that we talk about with in self-help. Sometimes people have an amazing story that's inspirational. Sometimes people have a knack for inspiring or motivating people. People will just have this natural aptitude, like you were saying as well, Eilish. But I think there's a lot of value in going through a more rigorous training and certification process to sort of learn what you don't know. Like, you can't know what you don't know yet. And I think that's something, a problem that a lot of sort of gurus get into sometimes. So that's really interesting. So what can you tell consumers about if they're looking for a coach? What details should they be looking for in the credentials? Because sometimes we'll see, I'm a such and such certified coach, but what does that mean? How can the consumer tell whether or not that's like a robust certification? Eilish, maybe you can speak to that a bit.
Yeah, I think that, when you're looking for a coach, it's important to have a conversation. And the first thing, I suppose, we just talked about credentials, and a lot of people call themselves coaches. I think that's what Kathleen said earlier, and maybe they aren't what we would consider a coach. And ICF did robust survey last year, pre-COVID. They did one in COVID and one since COVID began, which is very interesting, and it's all available on the website. But 23%, I think, of coaches said that one of their biggest problems was the number of coaches calling themselves coaches, and they're not coaches. So that's a big concern. And the other thing is, how would I find the right coach? Well, there's called like a chemistry meeting, or you could call that a match. Am I a match? You know, if you like, I've had people come to me for mentoring, and they didn't select me, and I don't know why. I think I have to up my act on how I sell myself, but they didn't select me, so obviously I didn't have what they required. So I think that's okay, you know, but I do think that you need the conversation. You need to see, have their credential. What body did they train with? Because people train for 2 days and say they're a coach.
Right.
That is a fact, like, you know. So for somebody who's come through a body of training, like it could be ICF accredited. Like, there's lots of training schools out there that ICF will rubber stamp, if you like, because they meet their standards. So they could be, I don't know, there'd be probably hundreds, if not thousands, of names of classes or schools. But I think the main thing is that you meet the person and you get a feel for that they know what they're about. Because I know that before I went into coaching, I actually thought coaching was, I go to you and you tell me what to do. If I need to know something, you're going to fix me, and when I come out of the room, I'm going to know everything. I really did think that's what coaching was, and I think maybe more than me have that perception. I don't know, Kathleen, what do you think?
That's right. And still now, a lot of my external clients, the institutional clients, will call and say, fix this guy. And I always come back and I say, he's not broken. He's not meeting your expectations. Clearly, I get that, but he's not broken. And so part of it when you're dealing with that person is saying, this is what your boss is saying. Do you care? And if you don't care, are you willing to deal with whatever the consequences of not caring will be? So it's about saying, okay, you have to fix this because you're not broken.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's interesting. I think when you're looking for the certifications or I always tell people, look and see in the States anyway, where was this school where this person is trained, certified by ICF. Because I could put out a Brady certification on how to do a job search, right? And certified, but what does that really mean?
Yeah.
So I think you want that governing body that has some principles, and you want to make sure. I also think you want to look at the person's client base and their background a little bit. So if I always laugh. Somebody's calling themselves a nutrition coach and they're 70 pounds overweight, and maybe that's not the best person. So you want to make sure that they've got some understanding of whatever it is they claim an area of expertise, whether it's leadership or whatever it might be. Have they written a book? Have they served those kind of clients? The style is incredibly important, as Eilish said, because I'm not for everybody. There are some people who like a very rigid sort of coach, not rigid, but kind of a more standardized coaching, a little bit more bespoke, because it depends. Let's see where it goes. And that style doesn't work for everybody.
Right.
So they really have to talk to a few people and then make some decisions about who they connect with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I like all of these points. I hear, seeing if the certification is sort of backed by something more robust. Eilish, you were also speaking about the number of hours that people put into their training, which is interesting as well. Getting some sense of their background and other clients. I think these are all great tips for consumers who are looking for a coach. We talked about this a little bit, but maybe we can speak about it a bit more. I'm interested to hear your perspectives on, how coaching differs from therapy or counseling at one end, this sort of mental health care system. And then on the other end, the very self-directed self-help stuff. You both spoke a little bit about not being focused on the past, which I think is something people would talk about with therapy. So as a coach, how do you avoid getting sort of pulled into that with a client? Like, I'm assuming you have some sense of your professional boundaries with people. Kathleen, maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
It's always interesting because when someone will tell me that my therapist said, in a coaching session, I will often sort of stop there and say, okay, there's a distinction between what that person does and what I do. And if I'm ever sort of as we're thinking through things that you might want to do, if it's something your therapist says is not the right way to go, like you got to trust that. That person has a training that I don't have, and they may see more things than I see. So you want to be really careful. Or if it stumbles into an area, I know enough to ask some diagnostic questions, and then to be able to say, this is not something that I can be helpful with. Really, do you have a therapist? Are you in therapy? Or, I can make a recommendation if that's helpful, but that's sort of beyond the scope of what I'm able to help you with. You really do have to say those things. Eilish, is that...
Yeah, and I would say, in the initial coaching agreement, it's something that's drilled into you in the training with any ICF accredited, that we make it very, very clear to the client or the person sitting in front of us that it's not counselling. It's not giving advice. We're not going to give you advice. We're going to work with you to be your best self. So what I do, like, I have a contract of agreement, and I outline that to whoever it is, and what my role is as a coach and what I expect from them. And then I also have a section, what I expect from myself, what I expect from you, and then all that other part of agreement, like what's confidential. The confidentiality is central to like, I always think, no matter what the conversation is, if confidentiality is expressed, then it only works if that's maintained for both parties, and for me that's an essential part of coaching. So I would say it's beyond it is self-help, really, but it's not giving advice. Definitely not giving advice.
Right.
It's very interesting you say that, and that's something that we want to stress. A true certified coach is going to make you sign some kind of an agreement before they start the coaching process. Somebody who just calls themselves coach may not do that. And so that's a really good sort of distinction for you.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
And the other thing, part of my agreement is that you identify 3 goals at the outset, and what do you think will work for you in the coaching, and what do you think might be a barrier for you, and we address all that in the agreement, and I ask people to fill that out before they attend, so it gets us off to a good start.
Yeah, that's another excellent point to include for people. You should see very clearly delineated set of goals and an agreement, a sort of scope for the work that you'll be doing.
Yeah.
The other thing too, I think people have to be careful with is one of the things they drilled home in IPEC for me was, are you in that person's story? And so, because sometimes people ask you to coach them if they're friends or family members, and you can use some coaching techniques, but you really can't be their coach because you're in their story. And you have, even though you say you're being objective and maybe you can provide a perspective, you're still too close. And some of the roles, particularly in corporate America, where you are both a manager and a coach, those people tend to want to use more of their coaching, but sometimes you have to be the manager, and your job is to say, you have to do this. And that's really, it makes the coach role a little bit more difficult. So I don't think in those instances you can really call yourself their coach. You can say you're using coaching skills, or coaching techniques, but at the end of the day, you're really the manager. So you've got to I think there have to be bright lines in some of these things.
Yeah, and I like what you're pointing out now, because when I was in the health service, I was the lead for coaching and mentoring, setting it up. We developed a coaching culture, and we went on to win the ICF Prism Award after I left, but it was the same setup. But what I had difficulty with when I was coaching someone was the very fact that I was a very senior manager, and they were coming with issues that I knew the answers to. I could just say, look, we suspend the coaching, I'll mentor you. And so the whole thing is about the contract and the agreement. So if I contract with you if you say, if I'm not getting it or whatever, and tell me, it's okay. But coaching is not about telling. The key, and that's one thing I also learned from Judith Glaser in listening, and Deborah will know this. The 3 levels of listening really came home to me when I did that course. Level 1 is telling, telling, asking. So if you're telling somebody, they're not going to develop because you're telling them. But that aspect of being the manager was a real difficulty for me, Kathleen, when I was in when I was in the health service, and I worked hard on it, and it took a long time to get to where I am and get rid of those habits, I would say,
Right.
Because there is a tendency in an organization, they want me to fix this person straight away, like, as you said, get the problem sorted.
Right. It's interesting too. Mentors, this is not to say that any of these other roles aren't important. They are mentors can be incredibly important, but mentors they give you guidance, they serve as inspiration, they can kind of direct you and say, here's what I know works here. But at the end of the day, you have to then take that information for yourself and decide, will this work for me? Am I the same personality style as that person? Or how can I use this information to move forward? And that's where you mentor, so they're different. So coaching will say, okay, now you got this information. Let's see, how do you want to incorporate that into your personal and professional goals and, your own brand?
Right, right. Uh-huh. Yeah, this is great. I can see some sort of parallels with mental health care and the sort of standards that are, and the sense of setting some boundaries and expectations versus, other self-help that really doesn't always create those clear definitions for the work and the expectations. So I think that's a really valuable piece in the idea of coaching. What I am seeing with coaching is that it does seem like there is this push to create more professionalism within the industry. I'd say, I don't know, probably in the last 30 years, it seems like this has sort of grown into something. Coaching is like a huge industry that's expanding. And so with that, I think there's this internal push to really professionalize. How have you experienced that throughout your careers? Eilish, maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, well, I would say, starting off as a coach, like I said, you do your training and you're kind of on the periphery of everything, but I would say from the International Coach Federation, it's all about professional development and, having CPD, self-regulating yourself, that and it's set up in such a way that you progress through the different levels if you wish. You have no push to go from ACC to PCC, but if you do, you are, if you like, on a journey to mastery. And so the journey is, it really, for me, I can speak about my personal story. As I said, that journey was difficult at the ACC level because, as I said, you're doing the what, and you're okay. If you say to me, I want to work on time management, and that's my big problem, I can't get my work done. An ACC coach will say, so what is it about time management? What would you like to work on? Whatever. And they'll run with that to the end of the hour. A PCC coach will go deeper and say, what is it about time management? Is there something else there to do with, I'm hearing you saying whatever and whatever. And so it is a development piece from ACC to MCC, the who and the what. And the new ICF credentials, which operate from the 1st of July, really focus very much on the who of the person and the what and the system and the wider organization, and also the personal and family. So there's a whole big, overview of all of that while you're coaching. So in terms of developing yourself as a coach, you have a responsibility and you have to learn that. And trust me, it is a struggle at times, as I say, because your tendency is to just go with what you hear. And the more you coach the person, the more you're in their space. And like Kathleen said, the one great tip I got from Cindy Noble, who trained me in conflict coaching, which is an excellent course, she taught me, stay out of your own head. That stuck with me now. When you go into a coaching session, you're in the client's head, not your head. And so it is a progression. And if you're being coached, you see, it is so easy to give the answers. I can remember having a client recently in the last 6 months, and she was really struggling, and I was struggling along with her. Sometimes we do parallel people, and I was saying, no, trust in what you've been taught, Eilish. Trust it, that it's going to work. And all of a sudden she got it, and it moved her so much, and she came back, and whatever it was she was working on, she went and implemented it, and it all worked. And she had spent hours upon hours worrying about that very thing, and she had it sorted in the morning at work. So it is all about holding the space. Silence is listening, and the trajectory from, as I say, student to learning to mastery. It is a journey.
Yeah, I love that idea that, as a coach, you're sort of open to your own growth as you become more experienced, as you get more training. And again, that's something that, like we were saying before, a bit of that humility, like Kathleen experienced as well at the beginning of her career, and understanding that you don't, even though you're sort of the one who is being contracted to work with a client, you don't have all the answers either. And understanding that, I think, is a really great perspective to have.
There are sometimes I've been in coaching situations where you're having this conversation and you ask a question, and then in my head I'm going, note to self, I got to think about that one. So because oftentimes they bring you something to teach you something,
right?
So it really is very much a two-way street,
right? Well, and it's like teachers talk about that as well. Sometimes you have to say to students, "Oh, actually, I don't know. I'll look that up and get back to you." Right? Yeah. No, I like that a lot. Kathleen, what has your experience been with the field of coaching and seeing it grow, the field as a whole grow?
Yeah, I'm a little frustrated, and that sounds terrible, but because there are like true coaches, people who are really coaches, and now everybody is just kind of jumping on the coach bandwagon, and everybody thinks that they're a coach, and like it's this brand new thing. There are a lot of people who've been doing this for a while, so it shouldn't annoy me. I like that. That's my own issue too, because the more people who are enlightened and are willing to sort of hold that space and be reflective, so they can be intentional, that's ultimately a good thing. But I think sometimes it's like I said, it's overused. People think they need a coach for everything, and sometimes it's just like, okay, everybody, take a breath. You can, like, some of this stuff, if you ask yourself these questions and really spend a little time thinking about it, you probably don't need 14 coaches on all these different areas of your life.
No,
right?
No.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too. We sometimes compare to the medical industry. We talk about, like you're saying, with people just sort of running around calling themselves coaches when they aren't really certified at all or qualified. If people were running around performing medical procedures, we'd be like, no, this is crazy. You can't do this, because this is an industry that we've already really professionalized. Put in the education piece, put in the licensing piece, and regulate it to protect consumers. But, in self-help, we're not quite there yet. So again, I see that there is that effort within coaching, which is really heartening to me, because I think there is great value in the work that a coach can do with a client who doesn't necessarily need, to go to a psychiatrist, but they need that sort of extra push to just help them, delineate their goals more clearly, and then figure out what their strengths and abilities are to work towards those goals. So I think that's really good that people like you guys exist.
I almost wonder if we shouldn't be calling it something other than self-help, especially because you go to self-help and you think, oh, this book holds the answer, and people read the book, and then maybe there's something that resonates with them or speaks to them, so they think, oh, this is how I should live my life, when maybe it was just one person's experience. And again, it can serve as inspiration or help you kind of reorient yourself or think about things differently, but it's inspiration as opposed to self-help implies that person knows something you don't know.
Right.
What they're doing is sharing their experience, and I think there's a difference there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and it's creating an awareness in the individual a lot of the time, that they become self-aware. And even as a coach, you have to work on that self-awareness. And from the International Coach Federation, that's expected, that you work on developing your own self-awareness. And that's a big thing in the new credentials or the new competencies going forward. And, you know, I'm thinking back to when I was a conflict coach, and I still do conflict coaching, and it would be for maybe people being bullied, and maybe I have bullied in large organizations, people being bullied, individuals, and resolving that through the conflict coaching. And it's a very structured process, and it can, I like what you said, Jean, there about mental health. Like that person that came to me within the last 6 months, it was bordering on that. Like, while coaching, you're to stay clear of any mental health issues, and you're taught that through your ethical standards, to point out to somebody if they need a professional, go to a professional. But there's that other part where a person is lying awake at night because of this problem, and it's a work problem, and it could be a boss and a subordinate. And even those two people, they were very senior managers, and I would have, it's a very structured process, as I say, but they would have had, you could see that it was affecting them, their mental health, because they were at the end of their tether to do with it. So coaching can be a vehicle to help people unravel what's going on. And what was interesting about that one that I did nationally was the lady who was accusing the other lady of bullying was, I thought, this is never going to be fixed. Like, but as I reflected on what I was doing as well as what was happening, I was realizing that I was taking responsibility. And then I started to look at, this lady doesn't mean the half of what she's saying, which is the truth, because she was so angry. And sometimes it's a dynamic going on between two people. And when they communicate properly, or you bring them to communicate, I mean, I brought them together, and I thought it would take at least 3 meetings, and 1 meeting, it was all done, sorted, signed. And so I'm just saying, it's a listening exercise, but it's also, and there's so much talk, isn't there, now about mental health in the media. We won't say where it's coming from, but all of that, and you know, very important people talking about their mental health, and it is a very important issue. Let's acknowledge that. But mental health is affected by everything that happens to us, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's so interesting, because to your point, I think one of, you know, people always say, what's the secret to success, right? I have it in one word: communication. It is, because oftentimes all of that angst and conflict and everything, it's because the communication goes like that. They're just talking over each other, or they're not hearing each other. So if a coach can help them hear each other better, they still don't have to agree, and that's okay. But as long as they've heard each other, then they can kind of work out a game plan. But that's, I often feel like that's part of my job, is helping them have those courageous conversations. Everything good lies on the other side of that difficult conversation. It's having that conversation none of us want to have. So if you have somebody there that can help you do that, and it makes a difference.
Right.
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
that can
really
be part of that can be very much a part of a coaching conversation, that someone's struggling with that.
Mm-hmm.
It's also interesting, because one of the things that I think coaches struggle with, and I know I've always struggled with, when I first started, I was very excited. There was a sense of relief of, oh my gosh, I don't have to have all the answers anymore. You know, like I just have to know what questions to ask. And that was really powerful for me. And I said that to a colleague, and she said to me, who was a counselor, and she said to me, sometimes people are paying you because they want the answer. And so for me, it's always, because I'm not at that master level yet, so I have kind of that hybrid of, when do I ask, when do I tell? And I always try to do it in the asking. But again, especially when it comes to career transition and things like that, sometimes you can share knowledge. So it's not telling them what to do, but it's saying, in my experience, when people do these 3 things, that leads them to get where you say you're trying to go. What do you think of that? So you can share the information in a way that's not telling, but is offering ideas. So it's, or somebody say, oh, let's brainstorm. Have you ever thought about X?
Mm-hmm.
So you're giving information a little bit in question. So it's not pure coaching, and I don't tell them at ICF that I do that sometimes. I don't want to get myself, but it depends where the client is at. Sometimes they're so stuck, and if you just share those ideas with them without telling them which is the best option, that's helpful.
Kathleen, if I can give you a tip on that.
Sure.
Because whenever you're introducing something like that to a client, you just say, have I your permission to point out some things to you? And you make an offering on your, like, intuition's very much a part of the new competencies. And it's, you share it. If the coachee wants to hear it and engages with you, fine. But if they don't, you drop it and move on. Exactly. So that's the rule on the new competencies, that's acceptable to make offerings, but always you ask permission. So you're not telling, you're asking permission. And if the person says, sure, I'd love to hear that, because sometimes you can see in front of you they're struggling.
Right.
Yeah. And again, I love this, that I can see through your professional training, having that sort of self-awareness of what it is that you're doing. Because again, I think, stories or examples can be hugely instructive and valuable to people, but then it's about letting that person sort of integrate that information themselves, as opposed to you telling them this is what you have to do.
Yeah.
So I think that awareness is really important, and I think that's something that probably comes with your training, that sensitivity to how it is that you're working with the person and the ways that your words can impact them is so important. Because again, in self-help, we don't always see that happening. People are just pushing out information, pushing out ideas or things that they're going to call a law or something like that. So Kathleen, to your point, about at Seek, since we created Seek, we have struggled with this idea of how to draw the box around what the self-help industry is. It's huge. It's diffuse. Like it sort of is like a spectrum almost of people that are practicing different techniques or people that are using different philosophies. So I like this idea of sort of parceling off what we can see is a very professionalized industry in coaching, and making consumers aware that there is a very clear industry over here, coaching, and this is what it can offer to you. There are, unfortunately, other people that are using that terminology of coaching that aren't actually what I would consider a coach, like compared to the two of you and other colleagues that you would have. So I like the idea of, as an organization, Seek, something that we can do is trying to make consumers aware of that there really is this very professional industry that can offer a lot of value, but then there are other people that you have to watch out for.
Yeah. And I think for the consumer, just kind of the baseline is, are they telling you or are they asking you? And if they're telling you, this is what you have to do if you want to be successful, who are they to tell you? And again, read it. Maybe you get something out of it, but don't assume that it is gospel truth for across the board. Kind of take it for what it's worth,
right?
As opposed to thinking that now I have to uproot and change my entire life to live this way.
Yeah. Because one of the things we've seen with that sort of tendency to tell people, this is the answer, this is what you have to do. If and when it doesn't work for them, then that person assumes a lot of blame. They take it on themselves that, this person who obviously is telling me they have all the answers told me to do this and it didn't work. It must be something wrong with me.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, that's a real concern that we have in terms of consumers and the danger that it poses to their sort of emotional and mental health when they're working with someone who's really not qualified to be guiding them.
And that really was the earlier point that I was making about, you can be working with someone who's calling themselves a coach and they're not actually, and you actually think they are. And that's the difficulty. And like, if I look at my journey from being a conflict coach, it's 14 years this year. And like, I would consider only in the last 2 years am I at any mastery level but I remember my nephew starting to train. He asked me about training and he was saying, I don't know about this coaching, Eilish, because he wanted to do the telling thing, and some people, if they've had 1 or 2 days or 4 days, they go off doing that, and they actually, everyone, if you book them, that's what they do. And if you don't know the difference, how are you going to know? You're not, that's the point I was going to make earlier. Like, how do they differentiate? And it is through the credentialing and the professional bodies overseeing the growth of the person, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what I'd love to do, I'm going to take this conversation and try to put together sort of some guidelines for consumers about how to look for a real coach.
Yeah.
Maybe I can send it to you. You guys can help me sort of workshop that, and then we can put that out to people. That would be great.
Sure.
So I want to thank you both. I think this has been a fantastic conversation.
Beautiful.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Great.
All right.
God bless.